Happy Pride, everyone. My asexual ass is here to answer your questions. So without further ado, let's get started with another episode of Q&Play. This first question from Machinima 2 is one I get pretty commonly in emails and in comments, so that's why I'm just going to answer it here, even though Machinima asked it like 2 months ago. Do you have your own RPG horror stories? If so, would you like to share them? I do have a few. I'm not going to share all of them. Some of them I'm not going to share through comfortability reasons or for comfortability reasons, but I am going to share this one that I'm loosely involved in that happened fairly recently. I was talking about Dungeons and Dragons, like 2 people came up to me and was asking me about it because I think the girl's boyfriend played the game a lot and she was like curious what it was like, and they knew I played because I think I had something on my bag, or I had the DM's guide like hanging on my bag. So she was asking me about it, and we got to talking about D&D, and this guy comes up to me and says, "Hey, you play Dungeons and Dragons? Like, do you want to talk about our campaigns?" And by "do you want to talk about our campaigns," he wanted to talk about his campaign, which I understand. You don't want to talk about your campaign with people, and you can't talk about it with your players because spoilers. So, you want to talk to anyone about your campaign, and usually it's other DMs. So this guy comes up to me and starts talking about his campaign. I think it was a little bit awkward because I was in the middle of a conversation, and I don't like it when people do that, like come into a conversation and just completely take it over. I just said goodbye to the 2 girls I was talking to about D&D, and they left, and he just completely like took over. At this point, I was really tired and my throat was raw and sore because I was talking a lot through this event, and I just had a long conversation, so I didn't feel like interjecting. I just decided to listen to this guy about his D&D campaign because, I actually enjoy doing that usually, so this could be interesting. There were a couple things that stuck out to me about his description, however. Number 1, he was bragging about how cool the characters in his campaign are, and I was like, okay, that's really cool. I really love it when a DM is invested in their player characters. I think that is a really awesome thing for a campaign. He starts talking about them, and he starts out by saying, "I have an Exo Titan." And I was thinking, Exo Titan? And then the gears started turning, and he said, "From Destiny." And I was like, "From Destiny? Okay, cool. Is your setting Destiny, or is it..." No, it's Dungeons & Dragons. He came into D&D through the Infinite Forest. And I was like, okay, that's very interesting. The Infinite Forest is this... It's not lore accurate to Destiny or Dungeons & Dragons, but the Infinite Forest is a way for Guardians to go into simulations of the past or the future. So I guess it could work, even though that's basically saying that everything in the D&D campaign is a simulation, which is kind of depressing. But anyway, point is, the guy says, "I took the thing from D and Destiny. I took the class, the Exo Titan, from D and Destiny." And that immediately put alarm bells in my head, because D and Destiny is a hack. D and Destiny is based on Dungeons and Dragons, but it is essentially a different game. It uses very different mechanics. The numbers are different. Basically, if you try to put something from D and Destiny in Dungeons and Dragons, it's not going to flow naturally. You're going to need to change up the damage values for stuff because everything in D and Destiny is upscaled, which is fine because the enemies also have upscaled health. But if you put that into Dungeons and Dragons, it's just not going to work. It is scaled differently. You're going to need to do some legwork. And that's what I told him. And he was like, "Oh no, it's been fine so far." And I was immediately thinking, okay, I guess if he says it's been fine so far, it's been fine so far. There's nothing to worry about. A couple months later, I'm working on a project with this guy, and I got to talking about D&D again. It's a common occurrence, I guess. It's not that common, but anyway, point is, I got to talk about D&D with some people, and this guy interjects, and it turns out he's in the exact same game as that DM. He's one of the DM's players, and I was like, oh wow, seriously? That's cool. What's it like? I was trying not to let an edge creep into my voice because I had not so fond memories of that DM's description of his campaign, because it just seemed like a mess of fanfiction-y material from the DM's favorite stuff, and it didn't really seem to fit into a balanced standpoint, which I know a lot of DMs don't care about, but I was just, at the time I was tired, and that's where my mind was at for some reason. And this guy responded, "Oh, it's really bad." And I sat down and I was like, "Oh, hey man, tell me about it." Because I think that kind of rant venting is very important for the soul. And he explains that everything is ridiculously powerful. All the players are ridiculously powerful, and the DM hates it. The DM hates how powerful the players are, which is really stupid because the DM was just saying how everything would be fine and he would make sure everything works. So he's the one who introduces all these overpowered elements. And when the players use them, he apparently gets upset and just instant kills them. He insta-kills the players with overpowered stuff. Just no reason, out of the blue, just instant death. That just seems very immature and silly. And then on top of that, this is where I come in. Essentially, I had a later conversation with this DM, and he asked me about my campaign, so I started explaining to him my campaign, and at the time I believe we were like 3/4 of the way through it, and I was telling him about all the stuff that happened, and he responded by saying, "Oh, your campaign seems too scripted." And I was very confused because I was just telling him what happened. Like, I don't know how he could get the idea that my campaign is quote-unquote scripted. By the way, it's not. My campaign is not scripted. I do write things down. I've said that before. I do take extensive notes, but I don't think that that counts as scripting. And it certainly doesn't count as railroading. My players do make a lot of decisions that caught me off guard. And so I told him that, and he was just like, "Oh, you just seem like the kind of guy who has one linear story. I have 10 endings already written for my campaign. My campaign is going to go on for another 4 to 5 years. Your campaign is ending in a couple months. You clearly don't have that much planned. That's the problem with scripting. You don't have enough content." And I was just like, okay, that's nice. So I didn't feel bad because I knew he was wrong in multiple levels. For starters, you can't expect your campaign to go on for 5 years. 5 years is a long time. A long time, and quite frankly, I don't think the story usually needs to be 5 years long. There's a time where a story needs to end, and my campaign has recently come to an end, and I think that it ended in a very awesome way. And on top of that, I just didn't like being called a scripted DM or railroading DM. That just seems rude, especially since this guy had never been to one of my games, he'd never seen one of my games. Like, I don't know how he'd get that impression. TLDR, a guy interrupts my conversation to brag about his game. I talked to one of his players, coincidentally, a couple months later. Turns out that his game isn't so great, and he also shit talks my game, so that's nice. Next question comes from I don't even watch JoJo. Anyway, how do you balance homebrew monsters for a party? Not looking for a specific guide, but more a tip on scaling AC and damage with level. This is a great question, and I do have a quite simple answer, and you might already know this or might already do this, but I actually think that this is really practical. Just look at the monster manual and look at level appropriate monsters there. Challenge rating is nonsensical. It makes no sense, but it is a decent gauge on how difficult a monster will be for your party. A challenge rating 10 monster is appropriate for levels 8, 9, 10, 11, etc. That's around a good level. I always advise that monsters be upscaled rather than downscaled. And what I mean by that is it's really easy to make a monster weaker on the fly as a DM. It is not easy to make a monster stronger on the fly if a party is doing too well, quote unquote. You don't want every encounter to be a just complete crap fest where the party just annihilates everything. I think that has its place, and I think a god mode encounter where the party easily wipes out the bad guys does have its place, but for big boss fights, the monster should be at least somewhat overwhelming. A good way to gauge that more specifically without looking at challenge ratings is just to look at average damage. Look at the average damage and gauge, hey, on average, could this monster down a PC in 1 round or 2 rounds? Can this monster reduce all the PCs to half health with an area of an effect attack? How much health do your PCs have? Compare that to the average damage a monster can do in the round. And then, look at the monster's health. How much of a beating can this monster take from the DPS dealers in my party? Look at that, and then see, does this monster have too little health or too much health? That's what I do when I get into the nitty-gritty and the specifics, usually at higher levels. When I'm dealing with a party at level 18, that's what I need to do. I need to gauge, hey, will this one-shot people? What can I do to distract PCs? What are alternate mechanics to keep them from just railing on this monster until it's dead, etc. I might make a full video about this because there's a lot to cover in this topic, but that is a great question, and I hope I provided somewhat of a good answer. Question from Ethan Morrill: what is your favorite of the 3 pillars of D&D? social, exploration, and combat. I actually had no idea that there were 3 pillars of Dungeons & Dragons. I'm sure someone came up with that topic. Is it in the DM's guide? I must have missed it. Anyway, point is, of those 3 things, as a player, I really enjoy exploration. That's probably my top, though I think all of them need to be in a game together, especially a game like Dungeons & Dragons. Combat is a huge part of D&D. I don't think D&D is the best game for a combat-less experience. I think exploration won't hold up without the danger of combat, and political encounters are really fun for me, but I'm always playing characters that don't fit in that kind of scenario. As a DM, social encounters are easily my favorite. Combat is really stressful as a DM, and exploration doesn't have the same flair when you're the guy running the world. You know everything. So yeah, definitely social encounters. Especially since a lot of the PCs I play during DMing are Machiavellian schemer kind of characters, which makes social encounters really fun for me. So yeah, out of the 3 pillars, those are my favorites. Question from Wes C-W. Have you ever tried a pacifist run during a D&D game? No, I haven't, and the reason is something I just covered. I don't think D&D is the game for pacifism or a game that can be supported without combat. I'm sure it can do that. I'm sure someone out there has run a completely pacifist game of D&D. However, I think that they were shooting themselves in the foot by not just using a different system. There are plenty of great games that can facilitate a combat-less experience. Call of Cthulhu, I played with 0 combat. It was all exploration, all just horror kind of elements without us trying to fight anything. That was awesome. I don't think D&D could facilitate that same kind of thing. At least not properly, and at least not as good as other systems. So yeah, that's why I haven't run a pacifist D&D game. Question from our Lord and Savior. When crafting homebrew, for example your magical items, aside from the DMG, was your go-to resource to compare your ideas? Usually I just head over to Unearthed Arcana and just browse around with what people are making there. I also use Griffin's Saddlebag a lot for magical items just to compare the effects and gauge how powerful this is going to be. Comment sections are really helpful just to say, hey, I think this was really overpowered, or hey, this is really underpowered. I also just message people, fellow DMs, hey, do you think this is too much? Like one time, I gave my players a flying broomstick, and I had no idea how powerful that was going to be, and I realized quickly that this is not a very overpowered item, this is not going to break our game, so I edited it in. And I think that that is a really big part of what I do for prepping, is just consulting other people, either directly or just looking at sources online like Reddit or Twitter or whatever. I think that that is really helpful, especially when you're homebrewing, because it's really hard to gauge how powerful or how weak something is going to be, an item or a monster, until it's used in the game. And people will always find some way to abuse, and that's where balancing comes in. I think it is perfectly okay for DMs to change something midway through. Look, there is no way, with all the references in the world, you will not anticipate everything, and something is going to happen. Something is going to be out of your control and break the game. I think it is okay for DMs to have a discussion with their players about how to balance this sort of thing. I don't think that's a big deal. Balancing midway through, I think, is alright, as long as you don't go crazy and nerf everything players are good at, because, quite frankly, that is lame. Alright, final question from Collier. Do you ever write your own D&D modules, and if so, would you get any of them published? I have written a homebrew campaign, and I did write books for it in the homebrew website. I believe it was Homebrewery that I wrote the first one, and then I think I did the second one just in Google Docs and just copy pasted it into another website. I don't remember which one, doesn't really matter. Point is, I have homebrewed my own stuff and even created books for it, but I would never get them published. I don't think that that is something that is in my rapport. Quite frankly, I'm not that great of a DM, and I'm definitely not that original of a DM. I think I'm good, but I don't think I'm good enough to publish something, or at least be of help to anyone in that sense. I think giving advice is kind of my purview. I don't think that my published work or my homebrew adventures could help people. And also, in terms of writing a module, I think I could do it. If I took all the things I've written so far for this current campaign that I just ended, if I take all of that and put it into a book, I'm sure I could create a module for it. But I think that there's more to making a worthwhile module than just putting down what happened in your D&D game. You need to have choices and options and resources for DMs that I don't have. So yeah, I'm probably never going to publish any of my work, but I have homebrewed campaigns before and I had a great time doing it. Alright, if you guys enjoyed this episode of Q&Play, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, including my other series, and this one, then please do hit subscribe, and subscribe to Crispy's Tavern. And finally, if you want to leave your own thoughts, or even some questions I might answer in the future, go down to the comments down below. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell. Also, stop asking what my favorite class is. Holy shit.